everyone's expecting the phone call and been waiting for the phone call, and so they finally get this phone call from you, and they're so excited on the other side, and just like like I remember calling my mother-in-law, and she's like, Jason, you got news for me? Like, who was it, a boy, was it a girl, like what was it, were you right, was I right? Because we always take bets on these things. And just having to say, like, we had a boy and he didn't make it. Our story started about 3 years ago. In August, my wife was pregnant with our third child, and she was 8 days overdue. And yeah, we're kind of used to that already anyways. Our other two children were also overdue. I think our firstborn was like 14 days overdue or something ridiculous. So both of them had to be induced. Both our older two had to be induced for them to kind of join us in this world. And so when our third child was 8 days overdue, we were already starting to plan that induction and plan how that was going to go. And on the Friday of April 12th, I went off to work that day, and my wife sent me a text in the morning and said, hey, just so you know, I'm starting to get some contractions. Make sure that you stay near your phone. And a little while later, I got a message back from my wife saying, hey, it's time to come home. And so I swooped in to our house like some sort of superhero, and quickly, got the kids all ready, helped them finish their lunch, got all their stuff packed up, brought them off to my in-laws. And around that time, we got a call from our midwives, or we called the midwives, and the midwives were on their way down. And the first one showed up, and she laid my wife down on the couch and pulled out her ultrasound machine and started checking for the baby's heartbeat, and couldn't find one. And she said, oh, it's probably just like this ultrasound machine is old. It's been kind of terrible and off lately. The other one's coming, should be here any minute. And minutes later, the second midwife showed up with, a more reliable ultrasound machine. And again, laid my wife down on the couch and tried to find the heartbeat and couldn't find one. And in that moment, the hospital was called, and we were, do we go to the hospital? Do we not? Just before the midwife showed up, they gave us the news that all the hospital rooms were booked that we were going to. So either you get switched out of midwife care and go into another hospital, or try and have a home birth. And so when they couldn't find the heartbeat, then they called up the hospital, and amazingly, a bed had just opened up. And so we rushed down there. About 10 minutes later, we got there, and maybe not even 10 minutes after we got to the hospital, our son was born without a breath. And I just remember sitting in that hospital, and just that sound of silence that just kind of overtook the room, and all the little beeps and people were kind of rushing around like nothing, just nothing made a sound. It was just silence, where there should have been screams of a little baby or the cry of a baby. Instead, the only thing that you could really hear was just our hearts breaking, essentially. There was a bunch of different theories around what happened. You just kind of learn to surrender with it, really, right? Like, at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter. They could have given us an answer, perhaps, like if we would have been like, yeah, go ahead, do an autopsy and like all this kind of stuff, which would have prolonged absolutely everything. Like, 'cause he was born on a Friday, he was buried on Sunday already, right? And so it went quick.
Yeah.
And we were like, no, we're not, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter why, like, he's not alive, he's just not. And as long as our biggest question, or my biggest question especially, was, if we try and have another child, which we did, if we try and have another child, will the same thing happen?
Yeah.
Right? And so the biggest, answer that we got was, it's one of those freak things that just happens sometimes. And at the hospital, they had a photographer come, and they took a few pictures, and we called him Ezra, our son Ezra William. And a photographer showed up. They took a bunch of different pictures, and which at the time seemed really weird, where you're in this place of this maternity ward, and everyone around you can hear like people coming in and be like, oh, congratulations, and this is awesome and wonderful, and then everyone that was kind of like coming into our room was just like solemn, and tears flowing down their face, and so we're like trying to like figure out what's going on, and there's this photographer there that's just taking pictures, and so when you did notice the photographer is like, this is a weird thing to be documenting, and now now having those pictures, it's like, oh, I can't imagine not having those pictures. We made the phone calls like we normally would when a baby was born, and call your parents, call your friends. Like, everyone's expecting the phone call and been waiting for the phone call, and so they finally get this phone call from you, and they're so excited on the other side, and just like like I remember calling my mother-in-law, and she's like, Jason, you got news for me? Like, who was it? A boy? Was it a girl? Like, what was it? Were you right? Was I right? Because we always take bets on these things, and just having to say like, we had a boy and he didn't make it. You just hear like the air deflate out of people, and it's just that silence again, always that silence that it comes back to. And so we had people that came to the hospital, like some of our really great friends that we would consider family, showed up to the hospital, came into the hospital room, had the opportunity to meet him and to hug him and love him, and us. And our kids never ended up coming to the hospital. It was one of those emergent, like our oldest rather was 5, just turning 6 when it happened, and so he had a bit of an idea what was happening, and but our second child, she was about 2 at the time. Every now and then you think back and you're like, did I make the right choice? Did I not? In bringing them, not bringing them to the hospital, or should I have brought them to the hospital? Because now, our oldest son is 9, and he's like, oh, I wish I would have met him, and yeah, it's one of those judgment calls that you make that I think regardless of the decision that you make, you're never going to know, was this the right decision? Was it not? And so there's, I think, just this grace you need to give yourself and your partner, that you're not going to get it all right all the time. And you're also in the middle of your own grief and like the shock of what is happening. And so those decisions that you make, they're the best that you could do at the time with the information that you had. And so I think there's a level of grace there. There's a level of compassion that you have to give yourself and your partner. I quickly became the PR person, the public relations person. So if people had questions or was dropping off a meal or anything along those lines, I would be the person at the door or the one picking up the phone or whatever. A good friend of ours, Amy, she was, when we first lost Ezra, she's like, I'm going to set up this meal train thing. People are going to show up at 5, and this is one of the ways I'm going to help you. And I said, no, we'll be fine. Like, we're just gonna it'll be a good distraction to be able to cook and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, no, Jason, like this is happening. And that first day, that Monday, when someone showed up with a meal, I was like, oh my goodness, thank you. Like, I totally even forgot that the kids would want to eat because I just wasn't hungry. Gina wasn't hungry. But the kids are still there. They're still around. They're still, wanting to eat. And so having someone that just show up and bring that, for me, it was a big lesson, in listen to the people around you, because sometimes they'll know what you need better than you know yourself, and your family, and I've always been the kind of person, and I know a lot of guys are like this, that it's like, no, I'm fine, like I'm good, I'm just gonna kind of carry on and keep going, I'm not gonna stop. And for me, it was just a good reminder of you can't do it all on your own. And so I became kind of that point person, that PR person. And it's almost an out-of-body experience. At least for me, it was almost this just out-of-body experience where you would be telling this kind of like canned story of like, this is how Gina is, this is how the kids are, this is how like everything happened or what's going on, and so on and so forth. And it's just like you float outside of your body and you're just kind of watching yourself do this almost from an emotionless standpoint, right? Which is really weird and really difficult to kind of see yourself in that position. And I think the hard part for me was it's so easy to step into that PR role, and to a certain extent it's almost comfortable because you don't actually have to deal with anything. You can kind of just push it down or push it off to the side, and it's almost like it's happening to someone else. But at the end of the day, that shit bubbles up. I actually started going to a therapist after a couple of months of seeing a therapist with my wife as well. And I think main part of it, my wife didn't really want to go to a therapist by herself. And so I went to a therapist and she's absolutely wonderful and she's great for my wife. Just wasn't a really great fit for me. And so I went and I just sat there and was kind of that physical support of just sitting there, holding my wife's hand, just actually being there. And I didn't really say much unless I really needed to during those times. And it was during those times actually that I was kind of like, this is a really good idea for all people to just go to a therapist and a counselor, because we're all messed up in some way. We all have our things that we're dealing with. And so because of that and a whole lot of other things, I ended up going to a therapist and still see her, to this day. I go every about 6 weeks to 8 weeks, and just kind of a check-in. Sometimes it's kind of a check-in, and sometimes it's kind of more of a deep dive into whatever is happening that specific day or that week or that month. And so for me, that's been incredibly valuable and hugely helpful. The other thing is just having community around you and friends around you. I remember one of my best friends, Benj, he came over one night and we're sitting on the back porch and he's like, "Oh, how's it going, Jason?" And I kind of went into my PR spiel around this is what's going on, this is what's happening for my wife, this is what's happening for my kids, blah, blah, blah. And as I finished, he said, "So what's really going on? Like, how are you really doing?" And that was a question that just broke me, right? And to have someone that was there and just willing to sit in the shit and just be there and not try to pull you out or anything along those lines. That for me has just been absolutely incredible. And having some of those different people in my life and being able to, even as awkward as it is sometimes, especially for guys, I think it's super awkward to be like, "Hey, this is what I'm feeling, or this is what I'm doing." To actually step out of your comfort zone and do that. I have this one friend, one of my other best friends, Russ, and he is a guy's guy, heavy diesel mechanic, can fix anything, can drive anything, can shoot anything, kind of your guy's guy. And he took me out the one day, probably a week or two after we lost Ezra, and we went out shooting, just out into the woods, not shooting anything particular, but just shooting targets and stuff like that. And we just sat there and shot and chatted. And I think that for me, it was one of the bigger lessons of, especially for guys, and I know that females have this as well, that sometimes it's easier to actually talk about something when you're busy doing something else. So therapists and community have been absolutely two massively helpful things. I've done a lot of reading on my own around different books. One book, for example, it's called "It's Okay Not to Be Okay" by Megan Devine. And it's absolutely wonderful, especially if you're in the throes of that grief. A lot of the literature out there and a lot of the blogs that are out there are primarily focused towards women, which makes sense. they're dealing with a lot of different things during that time, and so there's a lot less out there, I find, for men. But I think if you're looking hard enough, you will find different things. It's one of the reasons I started a blog about my experience with it, because I just wasn't finding many resources for men out there. And having been in that community for 3 years now, I'm starting to find more and more stories and more men that have been affected or impacted by this. And everyone, I think, deals with it differently. And so part of it, I think, is just knowing who you are as a person and what supports you need. And so for some people, I think it's getting back to work early. For others, it's taking that extra time. For some, I think it's not dealing with those emotions, not dealing with those feelings in the immediate aftermath of it, which is fine as long as you're going to deal with them at some point. As long as you have someone to talk to, whether it's a paid professional or a friend or what have you, that you're able to actually have some of those conversations and sort through what it is that's happening. Because I think for a lot of us, we're like, oh, we're strong, we're tough, we can deal with this. And yeah, maybe you can, and it will eat you alive inside, and it will tear you out from the inside out if you don't actually deal with it, if you don't actually talk with it and about it in whatever way that you deal with that. So this is the end of part 1 of my story, and there's more to come in another video, so make sure that you subscribe so that you can follow along for the next video. You can find me over at theycallmedad.ca, or if you're on the social medias, you can find me at JasonDYK at pretty much everywhere.